And so we continue. This is the Distributor Advance, a non-serviceable part. Lucky for me. Also lucky for me, because I didn't remove the oil pump or camshaft, we don't have to mess about retiming the distributor drive to the camshaft. See that gear down there with a slot in the top? That slot clocks the distributor. It's eccentric, so the distributor can only go in one way. But the gear itself has to be timed correctly with its corresponding drive gear on the camshaft. Like I said, I don't have to do that on this occasion. But if you do need to set this up from scratch, when the motor is at top dead center and you view it from just the right angle, the eccentric slot needs to line up with Atlantis. Okay, maybe that's not exactly right, but something vague like that anyway. Maybe back to Solihull instead. I failed to order new studs for the exhaust manifold. I thought I had, but I thought wrong. Because I live in the metric future, I can't exactly wander into a hardware store and pick up an assortment of 5/16 studs. I have a lot of 8mm stainless floating around, and I thought it'd be fairly quick to knock out a set of sweet manifold studs. I thought this would take me an hour or two. I thought wrong about that as well. But we got there in the end. This is the flywheel. The flywheel contains a bronze oil light bearing at its centre. This is what wears out if you're the kind of mechanically destructive person who likes to sit in traffic with their foot on the clutch. Anyway, I do have a new bearing, but these have to be reamed or bored to size after fitting. And that's not easy for me to achieve with the equipment I have. The bearing that's in it is still in spec, so I decided to leave well enough alone. And now we get to the clutch itself. Not everyone who watches this is a car guy. So how do I describe this? A clutch is like a sandwich. The flywheel is one piece of bread and the pressure plate is the other. The clutch plate is slippery meat. So if you don't hold your slippery meat, so if the two pieces of bread are firmly held together, the clutch plate is clamped in place and locked to the rotation of the motor. These forked clutch springs are what you press against with your foot. When the centre of the spring is depressed, the outside of the spring lifts the pressure plate away from the flywheel, allowing the clutch plate to slip. Now I'm just bringing the pressure plate up against the flywheel. I'm holding the clutch plate inside. Sorry I didn't show that very well, it's a little bit of a juggle. So, as you can imagine, as I'm bolting the clutch cover onto the flywheel, the three clutch elements are being clamped tight together, because we have nothing in place to depress the spring yet. I don't want to fully tighten these bolts quite yet, because we have a little bit of alignment to do first. Look right in the centre. The clutch plate has an internal spline. That spline slides over the gearbox input shaft and drives the vehicle. The gearbox input shaft also slides into the bronze bearing in the centre of the flywheel. The trick here though is that until the gearbox shaft is in place, there isn't anything to line the centre of the clutch plate up with the pilot bearing. But they have to line up so that the gearbox shaft can slide in through both of them when you bring the gearbox and motor together. Now, there are special tools to help get this right, but I just eyeball it. If it's out, the gearbox will get snagged, and this will all have to be loosened off and realigned for another attempt. This time, when I bolted the gearbox up, it happened to go together just fine. So sad for you, no laughing at my rage on this occasion. Remember this? What kind of a moron puts grease on a Bendix drive? Sheesh. Okay, look, I know this motor storyline is all over the place, but bear with me, that's just the nature of getting close to the finish. This is the infamous oil filter. I say infamous because Land Rover people hate these. I don't really have a problem with them myself, but admittedly, it is difficult to replace the paper filter without having to go through an oil spill treatment program afterwards. The seal is just a thick piece of rubber, but the cover and seal are intended to be a non-serviceable throwaway part. The nut is peened or fused onto the end of the shaft. I mean, if I really wanted another small project, I could sort this out. But I think we're all getting a little impatient, and I'd rather just move things along. So like many wise Land Rover owners before me, I decided to buy an aftermarket adapter instead. That'll take the latest in oil filter technology. Well, okay, Land Rover were late adopters. What I mean is, the latest technology in 1950, a screw-on cartridge filter. I do intend to replace this crusty pipe. I have plenty of new tube. But I realised that I don't have a good bender for this size. I mean, I have a bender that covers this size, and if you want to form kinks, it's great. So for the sake of this video, a half-ass spray of black paint will do, and I'll sort it out properly later. The black tube is for the Pcv valve, a valve that releases oily pressure from within the motor into the intake manifold, so the gases can be burnt and spat out as exhaust. At some stage, Someone replaced the Land Rover Pcv valve with a small plastic version, which says Toyota. This is definitely going in the trash. I want a reliable vehicle at the end. I'll be replacing the unreliable Japanese valve with a much more efficiently sized English version. There is supposed to be a moulded rubber step-down hose between the valve and this pipe. A pretty insignificant part, but buggered if I can find one anywhere. In the meantime, I turned the steel adapter, which will work fine, but let's be real, the end result looks like a hose clamp salesman's sample display. And I replaced the old crusty steel vacuum advance tube with copper. Yeah, I know there are some issues with copper, but steel wasn't available in tiny size, and copper is commonly used here. A couple of clamps to hold this tube in place, and we're done. And I guess that's about it. The engine's back together and looks great. So thanks for watching. Wait, do we really care about a pretty looking motor? Let's fire this thing. Well, there you go. She's a little hard running without an exhaust, but I never doubted it'd fire right up. Now look, I enjoy poking a funny stick at Land Rover's shortcomings, and it's true. There is nothing funnier than parking a Land Rover on top of your mate's brand new concrete driveway. But all jokes aside, these are great little engines. This motor was in production for 40 years for a reason. It's simple, reliable, and in a series Land Rover, plenty powerful enough.